welcome everyone today to our 2022 Stand Against Racism rally. I'm Sarah Graham. I'm the Communications and Advocacy Manager at the YWCA National Capital Area, and we're really excited to have all of you here today. So, a couple of housekeeping items to keep our community safe. Please be mindful of others in their space. We are currently following any public health guidelines that are set forth within the district. We have masks and hand sanitizer if that's something you're in need of. If you're feeling sick, we have a medical tent that you can visit as well. Now, on to the reason that we're here today. Each year across the United States, YWCA's cross nation gather to take a stand against racism, to unite their voices, to educate, advocate, and call for racial, social, and gender justice. We know that racism is deep-seated and woven into the fabric of our institutions today, from civic engagement to economic development, from education to healthcare to investments in our community. We must work collectively to root out inequity in our communities and in the institutions that compose our society. We can't wait. Equity and justice now. So let's stand together today and every day and declare enough is enough. Today I'm really proud, very proud, to welcome speakers and activists committed to civic engagement, racial justice, and changing institutions. We're going to share their stories and their calls to action for you today. First, I'm pleased to welcome YWCA National Capital Area CEO Monica Gray.
Thanks, Sarah, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon. On behalf of the YWCA of the National Capital Area, I want to thank all of you for joining us today to stand against racism. I want to thank all of our partners, the Capital Area Immigrants' Rights Coalition, DC National Organization for Women, Serve Your City, the Palm Collective, the Poor People's Campaign, National Action Network, Planned Parenthood of Metropolitan DC, NAACP DC, the League of Women Voters, National Coalition on Black Civic Participation, and our parent organization, the YWCA of the United States. Thank you again for joining us in this important work. This is our 5th year hosting this event here at Freedom Plaza. Although Stand Against Racism has been a national event of YWCAs across the country for a number of years, we at the YWCA of the National Capital Area made a decision to hold a large public gathering here in Freedom Plaza in 2017 after a particularly contentious, racist, and hate-based national, congressional, and presidential election. It was clear from the election engagement activities as early as 2015 that a new caustic, venomous, and hate-filled rhetoric had entered the national political discourse, and that many of the advances of the previous several decades were being threatened. It was clear that a modern Jim Crow era was at our doorstep and that we needed to take action quickly. And so we made the decision to gather here at Freedom Plaza, named after Dr. Martin Luther King's iconic I Have a Dream speech, which he wrote across the street at the Willard Hotel. This place has been a gathering place for civic engagement for decades, and we felt that we too must come here and claim this place for the vision that Dr. King shared, but that we must all embody. And that hasn't always been easy. I was sharing just a few minutes ago that about 3 years ago when we held this rally, hoping to remind folks that our work here together is important and that standing against racism is something that we all need to do, we were visited by a group who were pro-racism. And they were a white supremacist organization who had planned to disrupt our gathering. Ultimately didn't do so because they said our gathering was too well organized and they didn't find any good opportunities to disrupt it. But they came to our office the next day and tried to do a little disruption. And it was an important but painful reminder to us just how important this work is. And so we continue to gather here year after year to remind ourselves and to remind anyone who gathers with us or who passes by that the work for racial justice isn't over. And so we gather ourselves each year, remind ourselves of the promises made and represented by the White House at that end of this street and the U.S. Capitol over my shoulder. We remind ourselves that the promises made at these institutions must be upheld. We gather here to strengthen one another in our resolve to continue to fight the legacy of racism in this country. Nearly 500 years of institutionalized racism impacts the daily lives of all of us, particularly our brothers and sisters of color and other communities. We are reminded that daily our brothers and sisters are shackled with vestiges of genocide in our country's Native people, of racist immigration policies, of chattel slavery, of segregation, of religious persecution, violence against the LGBTQAI community, and gender-based violence and all other hate-based actions that are taken up daily against many in our country. We hope that you'll continue to engage with our work, although we know we have difficult but important conversations to have. We hope that you'll become an ongoing advocate for racial and gender justice in our society, and in unison with us and with our partners in this work. And we encourage you to find out more about our partners in our work, and we look forward to engaging with you in the future. And now I'd like to introduce the President and CEO of the YWCA USA, Ms. Margaret Mitchell.
Thank you, Monica, and thank you all for being here today. As Monica said, I am Margaret Mitchell. I'm CEO and President of YWCA USA. We are a national network of local YWCAs serving 1,200 communities in 45 states and, of course, the District of Columbia. Our mission is eliminating racism and empowering women. It's powerful, right? I'm so very proud of the tireless work Monica and her team are doing in the National Capital Region every day to advance our shared mission. And I'm so proud that Melanie Campbell from the National Coalition of Black Civic Participation and so many other leaders will join you here today in the fight against racial justice.
Yes.
Monica, you and your team are leading the way. You are collectively powerful. Addressing racial and systematic inequality is absolutely in our DNA and it's in your DNA. And as a leader of racial justice organizations, we know that this is a long fight and we have to prepare for a generational fight. I'm so excited to see children and young people here today prepared to do just that. Each year, we come together around the country to stand against racism. It is a recommitment to our mission, and we stand in solidarity among those who are doing the work. And this year, we have focused on deep, systematic racism and inequalities, including voting rights, livable wage, reproductive justice, and the representation of people of color in the media. And of course, we're also focused on the false narratives of critical race theory. These are fundamental issues, and these issues are all under attack in our community. And we are lifting them up. You are lifting them up through our Stand Against Racism. The time for equity and justice in all of our communities, and especially in our communities of color, is now. It's a powerful action this year, our Stand Against Racism. And it's projected that women of color are going to be 53% of the U.S. by 2050. And yet this community continues to marginalize the economic, the political, and the social. This is why we have to come together. We have to come together. It is part of the white supremacy agenda for us to work against each other. Together we must build sustainable and strategic infrastructure to dismantle the institutional structural forms of racism. Your presence here today lets me know that you are willing to work to eliminate racism. It's still not too late for you to join our Stand Against Racism 21-Day Challenge, which is a virtual community of growth. You can do that by going online. I also hope you will join me this Thursday as I enter into a conversation with Dr. Bernice King, the daughter of Martin Luther King Jr., who now leads the Martin Luther King Jr. Nonviolent Center for Change, where we'll talk about voting rights and how we work together and mobilize for change. Action happens within each of us. And you can take action through the YWCA's Legislative Action Center, where you'll find opportunities to encourage Congress. I hope each of you is fired up. Are you fired up? Are you fired up for a Well, as I close, I want to thank each of you for coming out today, and I want you to be encouraged. The road is long, but it is not impossible. Thank you for being part of the next generation for the fight against racism.
Thank you so much, Margaret. I'd like to welcome now Elizabeth Schmetzel. She's a senior attorney at the Capital Area Immigrants' Rights Coalition, which strives to ensure equal justice for all immigrant adults and children at the risk of deportation in the Capital Area region and beyond. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Good afternoon, Washington. Thank you so much for being here. As you just heard, I am an attorney with the Capital Area's Immigrant Rights Coalition, and I work almost exclusively with people held in detention centers in the DMV. Many of our detention centers around this area are privately run, meaning they are profiting quite literally from the continued caging of people who tend to be black and brown. In fact, under 3 different administrations that I have done this work, never once have I had a white client. Never once have I represented a white man in a jumpsuit being held in a cage because he is seeking asylum. Never once.
That's right.
Never once have I walked alongside a white woman seeking relief from domestic violence and coming to the United States to seek that relief. Never once. Never once have I stood inside a courtroom with a white client next to me, seeking a better life. Never once. And we have inherited this system, this reality, from the history of this country. Friends, one of the very first pieces of immigration legislation passed by the United States was called the Page Act. It was passed in 1875, and it said that women of Chinese heritage could not enter the United States. It was followed 7 years later by the Chinese Exclusion Act, which said any Chinese laborers could also not come to the United States. It was based in racial animus towards the Chinese population. And the residue of that racial animus in our immigration system and in all of our systems is alive and well today. Think about the news right now. The United States is rightfully opening our arms to up to 100,000 Ukrainian refugees. That is right, and that is good. What are we doing to our Haitian siblings?
Say it. Talk about it.
What we are doing to our Haitian siblings is turning them back on airplanes for a country where the president was assassinated and gangs are filling up power vacuums and kidnappings and racism, and sexual violence is ubiquitous. But we are sending them back and we are whipping them on the way. And I don't know what's going to happen when our Ukrainian siblings get here. I'm excited for that day and I'm happy for that day. But I have a feeling their children won't be taken away from them at the border the way that the children of our Central American siblings are taken away from them at the border.
They won't be taken away from them.
And so, friends, I say this as a reminder of why we are all here, because the change in administration is not a change in our systems, and we need it all. The occupant of the White House is not the solution to our problems. So we gather here today to bear witness to that reality, to learn more about our ugly history, and particularly for those of us who are white, to own up to it, to show up at events like this,
Yes.
not as a performance, but as an openness to real transformation. Because the theme of this event is right. We cannot wait. We need equity and justice now. Thank you.
Thank you.
you so much, Elizabeth. Next, I am proud to welcome Rose Brunard. She's the board president of the DC chapter of the National Organization for Women. It's a completely volunteer-led advocacy group working toward liberation of women and girls in DC. Welcome, Rose.
Thank you. As she said, I'm the DC chapter president of National Organization for Women. The National Organization for Women has over 500 chapters nationwide. Our goal is to eliminate discrimination against women and girls in the United States. You're probably wondering why I'm here. One of our now 6 core issues is racial justice. This is because all discrimination is connected, and many women's sexism is impacted if they are a racial minority. We have seen how stereotypes of Asian women led to the 2021 Atlanta spa massacre, where a white man felt sexually frustrated and held negative stereotypes of Asian women. Native women across the country are missing, and not much is done of it just because of their race and sex. Black women have the highest maternal mortality rate in the U.S. because of stereotypes about the black female body and stereotypes that of pain and relating to black people. So we can't separate sex and race. Our other core values are reproductive justice, LGBTQ rights, ending violence against women, economic justice, and constitutional justice. All these issues tie into racial justice because women of color's well-being depends on bodily autonomy, getting paid equally, being free of violence, physical and sexual, and being legally protected under the Constitution. This recognition of racism ties into sex and is called intersectionality. This is why this is when we all think of fighting racism. Don't forget to think about how women are also affected by it.
Thank you so much, Rose. I'd like to now welcome Kevin Kramer. He's the co-founder and director of community engagement at the Palm Collective, which is a Black-led organization connecting individuals, networks, and grassroots organizations to end systemic racism in DC and beyond, while creating powerful communities through collective action. So, welcome, Kevin.
No justice!
No peace!
No justice!
No peace!
No justice!
No peace!
So first and foremost, I want to ground us in the space that we're standing in right now, because this is the auction block. This is where the slaves were sold, first thing. Second thing, I also want to give homage and pay homage to Turtle Island and the Piscataway land that we are standing on. And my third and final thing, if you are black, I need you to take one step forward. Thank you. Take one step forward. If you are a black woman, I need you to take 2 steps forward. Why? Because I see you, I honor you, and I thank you for your willingness to be here, for carrying us all on your back. And I just want to say, we wouldn't have the election turnout if it wasn't for black women. So first and foremost, thank you. So today we get to stand here and be in community and talk about standing up against racism. And what it takes to stand up against racism is for people to be bold, for people to be open, for people to have the willingness to fight change, to fight for change, and hold themselves accountable. And who particularly am I talking about holding themselves accountable? Y'all! I'm holding all of you in this space who are hearing this accountable to fighting for black lives, for fighting for queer lives, for fighting for indigenous lives, for fighting for women's ovaries, for fighting for our climate, for fighting for our health care, for our housing. We have to be willing to see the intersectionality that lies in our movement spaces, to show up, to pull up for one another. That takes a lot of radical love and a lot of encouragement and a lot of power to do those things. Because if we don't, while we are sleeping, they are working.
Go ahead. Yeah.
While you are at work, they are working. While you are waiting for your Fashion Nova to come in, they're working. While you're waiting for your mail to come in, they're working. So therefore, you need to work the same thing my mother tells me, you need to work twice as hard. Definitely, if you are white or white passing, if you are benefiting from the militia of white supremacy in this country, it is your duty to fight for my freedom. I am holding you accountable. It is time to get very controversial about black people's freedom, because we all need to know that when black people win, everybody under the sun in this country gets to redeem freedom, justice, and equity. And if you think that I'm lying, look at your lives. Look at your lives. Everybody in this country gets to go vote, even though 48 out of 50 states have voting rights suppression. Everybody in the whole world gets to come to this country and go to school because black people put their bodies on the line. You get to go marry any race you want to because black people put their bodies on the line. You don't have to go sit, drink, and fly in the back or not at all because black people put their bodies on the line. Performatively. That garnered us those conditional freedoms that we all cling so hard to. But look at the state of black people. We did all those beautiful things, and baby, we are reaping none of the mother effing benefits. Because we are not the beneficiaries of our own oppression. Y'all are. So I hold you accountable to hold my truths that you will deem yourself worthy and crown yourself to stand up against racism, white supremacy, colonialism, imperialism. It is your duty. You have to be willing to step out from the sideline and be on the front line, because if all you can do is acknowledge people that look like me from the front line, you're going to have to mourn me on the front line, because George Floyd could have been me. Antoine Gilmore, who died by MPD in this city, was shot 7 times in a moving vehicle, who has not, his biopsy report has not came back 8 months. Donnell Rochester in Baltimore, Maryland, queer and black, shot again in a moving vehicle. He was left 20 minutes on the ground, handcuffed. You may think that he probably died from his bullet wound. Baby, he drowned in his own blood. And this is the reality that is happening to black America. So we need to be very controversial when it comes to standing up and fighting for black people's freedom. Because when black people win, you win. So therefore, I want to conclude. I want you to repeat after me. It is our duty to fight for our freedom.
It is our duty to fight for our freedom.
It is our duty to win.
It is our duty to win.
We must love each other and support each other.
We must love each other and support each other.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.
Ashe. My last note I want to say is that at the end of the day, if we don't take the time and to build community and love radically and expand our horizons and how we show up for people, these things are not going to be so, because I'm acknowledging them, that it's really hard to do. To turn the other cheek. I'm asking you, I am pleading with all of you to love your neighbor very radically. Because if you do it, we will win. We will redeem the freedom, justice, and equity that we dream about. So do not sit by and say nothing when you see black bodies being slain. Do not sit around and do nothing when you know indigenous women go missing 10 times higher than any woman in the country. Do not sit back watching when women's ovaries are under attack. Do not sit back watching when black trans women live to be 25 years old. These are the realities. These are the truths. These are the facts. And if you sit back and you do nothing, I am holding you accountable to committing second-degree murder. Because if people have the power, if we keep this thing moving, because we all know when we went back to work, this thing, the militia, the United States government kept moving. So we have the power. What happens when the Democrat Party doesn't get 92% of the African American vote? What happens then? What happens when we don't show up to the ballot box? Because we know while we're sleeping, they're working, and they do not care about any of you. They don't see red They don't see blue. They see green and they see white. So who am I holding us accountable to? Each other. Each other. We have the power to tear down these systems and rebuild them in our own way. Especially when Black people are centered. Ashe. And my name is Kevin Kramer, and I am a full-time revolutionary, and I want you to remember the most radical thing you can do are decisions and actions you make for yourself. And I repeat, the most radical thing you can do is the decisions and actions you make for yourself, because it's a choice to stand up and say something in your office, in your job, while you're working. Call it out, because this country has become very scared and complacent from calling a racist a racist. And they, oh, you're going to play the race card. I'm going to play that card in another one. No justice.
No peace.
Wow, I am proud to know Kevin, and I hope you all are too.
Sarah, bring down the mic.
I gotta bring down the mic so you can hear my lovely voice. It's not as impactful as Kevin's, but he is a lovely human being, and I'm proud to know him, and I'm glad you guys get to share that with him today. I would now love to welcome Zilla Wesley. She's the DMV mobilization coordinator for the Poor People's Campaign, which works to challenge the evils of systemic racism, poverty, the war economy, ecological devastation, and the nation's distorted mortality. Welcome.
Well, dang, Kevin, it's hard to...
Okay, I think the mic dropped. It's cool. I'm loud enough. It's all right. So my name is Zilla Wesley. I'm here with the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for more revival. And actually, Kevin kind of switched to what I was going to say. It really is time for us to get uncomfortable, especially our white allies, about life and about everything. Because the narratives that we're really... Okay.
Girl, I was about to give you that.
Okay. The narratives that we are really giving is twisted. There are 66+ million poor white people in this country. And the narrative that we're given is what? It's Black people's fault. It's the Latinos. It's the people coming over from the border. It's the Muslims. It's everything else except for really what it is. But we are living in the echoes and the trauma of the remnants of slavery. Slavery is from everything and anything that is around, from our police force to even how the NFL uses the word owner and players. And most of the players in the NFL are what color?
Black.
Okay, thank you. All right, so what do I know is that 66 million plus people are making less than $15 a day per hour. And what does that mean? Are they all Black? No. So poverty in America is real. 140 million people are living in low income or impacted or poor, however you want to say it, in this country. But what does that mean? That's not, yet again, between systematic racism and how this system was made up for us to believe it is one people's fault, and the fact it's also through this system, it's all of our fault because we're not working hard enough, we're not smart enough, we didn't go to the right schools, we didn't do the right things. But the reality is half of us don't even have boots to even strap up to pull ourselves up, and the other half don't even have laces to even strap up. So with that said, the Poor People's Campaign, we're tired of this because stuff has been in place from the Doctrine and Discovery to the John Punch case of 1814, where a Black African enslaved person and he was indentured servant at the time, and 2 Scottish people ran away, and he was sentenced to life to the Commonwealth of Virginia. and the other 2 were released, given land, and was living their best life. So with that said, there's so many laws, acts, policies that have been in place to keep this violence of systematic racism going and going and going. And it doesn't matter who's in office, because if the people aren't together, like the preamble says, and I know a whole bunch of white old people wrote it, who owned slaves, but the reality is they're all dead now, right? So we can make our own way and make our own history, because if we don't start standing up for each other, it's no time. Our freedom and liberation is within each other. So with that said, we're calling a meeting as a campaign on June 18th, 2022, here in this very spot of Freedom Plaza. Like Kevin said, this is where they used to sell slaves. You know, like so many, yeah, that's, let me not get started on that one. But with that said, please join us on June 18th if you want to know any more information. We have a table right here, because we need especially people from this area. Because we also, the mayor's office is right here, but we have our unhoused population. Rent keeps going up. To really survive in DC, you need to be making over $31 an hour. And I know that hasn't been passed yet anywhere, or did I miss that? So the reality is people are being hurt, and it's time to lift from the bottom so everybody rises. Thank you.
Scylla, thank you so much for joining us. Now I'm also very proud to welcome Nina 2X, the president of the DC chapter of the National Action Network that promotes a modern civil rights agenda that includes the fight for one standard of justice, decency, and equal opportunity for all people. Welcome.
Giving all praises to Allah God. I want to say thank you to everyone, especially the YWCA, for inviting us again for this annual event. It's a very important event at that. I want to acknowledge the Honorable Reverend Dr. Al Sharpton. Raise your hand if you don't know who he is. Oh, raise them high. Oh, okay. So I have to acknowledge him because he is the modern day civil rights leader in the world. Not because he's trying to win a contest, but what he set out to do is to complete and continue the work of the late, great Dr. Martin Luther King, who was sadly assassinated April 4th, 1968 on a Thursday. So the Honorable Reverend Al Sharpton and the National Action Network have taken the mantle, and all of the people in your prayers, you know who you are. Support any man, any woman, every woman that's doing something to continue Dr. King's work indeed. So we thank you all. I have to also acknowledge quickly the Senior Vice President of Policy and Strategic Partnership right here in Washington, D.C., working the National Action Network Bureau, and that is Sister Ebony Rowley. I have to acknowledge her because they're in and out of the White House doing things that the chapter doesn't do. Our chapter deals with 3 areas of situations. The national, what's going on in Minnesota right now. The local, we get the calls, someone is discriminated on their job, and individuals that have individual problems. But the Washington Bureau deal on more of a legislative policy, ensuring that the laws are enacted that we are all calling for. So you know, under the leadership of the Honorable Dr. Reverend Al Sharpton, that he has not, will not let up until the voting Rights Act is passed. He is continuing. I don't know how he does it rather. He's in Maine in the morning, North Carolina in the afternoon, South Carolina the same afternoon, and back in New York the very next day.
That's true.
And we're not talking about a 25-year-old gentleman. So I don't know how he does it, but with that kind of dedicated commitment, then that inspires us in D.C. and around the country. Every person, as Dr. King said, it doesn't matter the color of your skin, but rather the content of your character. If you have a character that want to see God's justice to be our reality, then that's what we're all working for. God could care less about your complexion. It's irrelevant. He's already chose your complexion coming out of the womb of mother. So the complexion is set up by those that advocate for racism, white supremacy. They're the ones that have a hang-up about somebody's God-given complexion. So it's the characters that we're talking about. So real quickly, I want to congratulate, compliment the new image in the movement. Back in the 1960s, the movement was certainly dominated black. You saw black people in the South marching from Selma to Montgomery, or was it Montgomery to Selma? But you saw black people. And rightly so. We're still at the bottom of every social part of justice. Even to this day, we're still at the bottom. But today, there's a different look in the ranks of the marchers. Today, we're seeing different genders, well, mostly different races, and in particular, I say Caucasians. That's just me. When I first saw with George Floyd and marching from Trayvon Martin, I was questioning, who are these people?
Well,
I really was. I wasn't used to this. Yes. And they were young people.
That's right.
See, it's the young generation, under 25, under 30, that have woken up in a spiritual reality to say, no, that's not right. After they took the facts and weighed the facts, and they were intelligent enough to say, something has to be done. And they have come out all over the country and all over the world to express a need and a want for God's justice. So I compliment all of you, and keep tapping your friends and your families and your neighbors, because they're saying all kinds of things about you, but it's not true. Keep marching for God's justice, because there will be a world of peace right here on this planet if we continue to stay in the march. And I'd like to close by saying, today I've been working the crowds with something called the Black Voters Guide. Isn't it ironic that a lot of black people have every reason under the sun why we don't vote? They will tell you from sun up to sundown how it doesn't matter. I say, well, what about the man that was castrated for just thinking about voting? Maybe we can move that gentleman's conscience. They'll come back with the argument why voting does not matter. But it does. Because if it didn't, why would the opposition go through everything, hanging and castrating and drowning and making laws even to this day? As one of the speakers said, 2022, there are 48, I think she said, states that have already enacted laws against voters' rights. So to my brothers and sisters, we have a major responsibility to continue to wake up our people in particular, because we need their votes. And they're going to argue you down, but keep pushing. In any way you know how child to get them to understand. If you want a new mailbox in your community, you want a swimming pool, how about you want more police presence? How about getting Supreme Court justice on the bench there? It takes voting. So we have to keep working on ours, and it's just to prove the residual effects of chattel slavery and the other slaves, the other held down under bondage, the effect of a black brother or a black sister that would say voting doesn't matter. It is the residual effect of what we're still climbing out of to understand, recognize, and to become whole again as a human being. Because we didn't go to the psychiatrist in 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, but in 1865, y'all can go. Go where? Yep. No education. Haven't been off the plantation. Go where? And we came through that through Jim Crow, segregation, and all of the other uglies that went along with that, and here we are today. So we see a lot of black on black crime, killing one another. It's not an excuse, but it's a small residual effect from the legal system of slavery that was by law held up with racism and white supremacy. So my black brothers and sisters, today, if you haven't signed the Black Voters Guide, which means it's a survey in our interest. What do you want over here in the wars? What do we need? We're sick and tired of giving these politicians our vote because they come out singing and smiling and singing a song that we want to hear. As soon as they get the vote, you don't see them no more till it's time for them to sing again. So we have to stop that. I bet I'm looking at some politicians out here, some future politicians. You've been thinking about it. Do it. Stand up, make the difference, and make sure when you do that you don't push God back because you got in with the vote. You make sure you stand behind God at all times. I thank you.
Thank you, Nancy 2X. Proud to know you as well. I'm very excited to welcome Jillian Burford. She's a communications coordinator for Server City, which is a community organization that offers life-changing experiences and opportunities for at-risk ECU students. It also serves as the infrastructure hub for Ward 6 Mutual Aid. Welcome.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jillian Burford. Today I wrote a speech. I spoke last year and did not have a speech prepared, but I'm still going to wing it. So my name is Jillian. I am currently the communications coordinator at Server City Ward 6 Mutual Aid. When I spoke at last year's Stand Against Racism rally, I still consider myself to be very fresh in my role, and I'm proud to say that this August will make a solid 2 years since I've been in this position. And while 2 years may not seem like a long time to many of you, 2 years is a long time for me because this is the longest I've been in one particular position. Server City Ward 6 Mutual Aid's commitment to improve the lives of DC's Black and brown youth and uplift our unhoused neighbors has provided me with a new point of access in the work to tear down the white supremacist structures that make a collective of leaders like ours absolutely necessary. For over a decade, Server City has kept an ear to the ground, working to ensure that Black and brown students have access to the tools necessary to succeed in a structure built up against them through access to unique extracurricular activities and tutoring programs at no cost to their families. In the true spirit of progress, that labor of love to make sure our Black and brown babies can find new spaces and new ways to grow, birthed Ward 6 Mutual Aid at the top of the COVID-19 pandemic, adding supports to encampments to ensure that our unhoused neighbors are treated with the dignity and respect that they are entitled to. We believe that humanity is not defined by access to wealth. And in that commitment to keep changing and growing as our community's needs shift, Serve Your City Ward 6 Mutual Aid has blossomed into a platform that prioritizes radical honesty and accountability through the development of policy teams and political education work. There are many moving pieces to this work, and every single member takes us a little bit closer and closer to our goal. So if you notice, I am the only person from Serve Your City who is here today because our folks are currently working in encampments to make sure that our unhoused neighbors are eating. We do that 4 times a week. So a lot of the work that you've been seeing on all these moving pieces, Serve Your City is there. To take it back to like the personal aspect of why I'm very glad to be up here today, because last year I actually said I did not want to have to talk about racism again, but I'm very glad that I had this opportunity because last year I spoke on my family's connection to Elizabeth City, North Carolina, where I just returned from this past weekend. And for those who are not familiar with Elizabeth City, North Carolina, it is a very small town in eastern North Carolina with a population that's less than Southwest DC. And last year, as of 2 days ago, was the 1-year anniversary of Andrew Brown Jr.'s death. And with me sharing last year and my family's connection to this specific town, which has actually been since the 1700s, Andrew Brown Jr. could have very easily been one of my relatives. So dealing with the backlash and seeing how all of this is still playing out, that even after one whole entire year, Elizabeth City still has not recovered from that fallback, where every single day I'm hearing sirens like I'm back home in DC. I grew up here my entire life, and Elizabeth City was my safe place to get away from home. But the racism, of course, doesn't know boundaries, it doesn't know borders, it doesn't care about the size of a town. So seeing how it's impacted my family, where we can't even go to the same spaces anymore because there's concern about gun violence, and there's concern about my younger brother or my younger cousins walking around downtown next to the Elizabeth City Police Department, and hearing that Al Sharpton has spent whole entire summers doing the same work that I'm still doing right now. And with that family connection, finding out that both of my grandparents from Elizabeth City, North Carolina, were both community activists and organizers, and organized right in Elizabeth City and marched with Dr. King. So I'm very proud to stand here today to share that aspect of the work that I'm doing with Serve Your City, that little tidbit about myself, because it is why I still want to be here, why I want to stand tall. None of this is written in my speech, so I'm just kind of vamping right here, but I'm very proud to be here, and my table is right there. We currently do not have flyers, but I am very much here to talk about all the work that I've done with Serve Your City, because it has impacted every single aspect of every single bit of work that I've done for years. Serve Your City helped me develop a library in Ward 7, where kids didn't even know they had a library. And this is before I started engaging in this work. So, despite the fact that we don't have flyers, I am the biggest fan of Serve Your City, and I will be sitting right here at this table and can provide more information and background. And thank you for having me here today.
Thank you so much, Jillian. I'm now really proud to welcome Takina Wilson. She's the Vice President of Health Programs at Planned Parenthood of Metropolitan Washington, D.C., whose mission is to provide high-quality, compassionate health care, including reproductive care, and also promote sexual health and advocate for reproductive rights and health equity for all.
Hello everyone, and thank you YWCA for gathering us here today to bring awareness and attention to an important issue that is severely impacting Black and Brown families. My name is Takina Wilson, and I'm the Vice President of Health Programs at Planned Parenthood of Metropolitan Washington, D.C., also known as PPMW. And on behalf of PPMW, like to share with you our statement and commitment to equity. Structural racism and cis and heteronormativity, patriarchy, and white supremacy are ongoing public health threats, and they are not new. Centuries of inequality and the COVID-19 pandemic have highlighted that Black, Indigenous people of color disproportionately become ill and die from health inequities and police brutality and xenophobic policies and practices. There is nothing intrinsic to these communities that increase vulnerability to these threats. It's racist, homophobic, and transphobic policies that diminish BIPOC and LGBTQIA+ persons' ability to access nutritional food, safe quality housing, healthcare, economic mobility, and personal bodily autonomy. The communities that are most negatively impacted by exclusionary policies and practices that impact quality of life also represent a majority of the patients and program participants that we serve. We are committed to public health by dismantling white supremacy. Planned Parenthood of Metropolitan Washington, D.C. values the fundamental right for all people to control their bodies, their lives, and their futures. Central to this work is addressing the systems that threaten this goal. We recognize that the work of dismantling racism and white supremacy will be ongoing, and will rise to the challenge time and again. It is our responsibility to work towards building a society in which equity is a reality, where every person's right and dignity and justice and autonomy is fully recognized and protected, where accessing quality health care doesn't depend on who you are or where you live, and where our communities work together so that every person has the opportunity to lead their healthiest, best life. This is why PPMW has worked over the last several years to expand telehealth services, at-home testing and treatment options, sliding scale pricing, and expanded our locations and service hours to aid in ensuring our patients can access care when and how they need. White supremacy and systemic racism permeates every American institution. Medical and feminist spaces are not exempt. PPMW recognizes how Planned Parenthood's beginning perpetuated systemic racism. Margaret Sanger, the founder of the organization that went on to become Planned Parenthood, believed in eugenics, which is in indirect opposition to our mission. Planned Parenthood denounces Margaret Sanger's beliefs in eugenics, the history and legacy of anti-Blackness and reproductive justice, and all forms of mistreatment that continue against BIPOC in this country. It is our priority and responsibility to ensure we are part of the solution and fighting inequity not only in our health centers, but in the halls of our local governments and in the streets. Recognizing that the barriers our communities face are systemic, we will put additional resources into our advocacy for legislation that promotes access to care, autonomy, and quality of life for our community. Ensuring equitable access to quality health care and sex education helps break down and eliminate inequities and cycles of oppression. Additionally, PPMW will continue to utilize an equity lens to consciously ascertain the impact of every one of our policies and practices. Our community members and staff, particularly those are BIPOC and LGBTQIA+, or hailing from our other historically marginalized groups. We will work for them. Our strategic plan demonstrates we will continue to put our patients, staff, and community at the center of everything we do. We embed equity into our work, from the ways we design care and train staff to the choices we make in plans for expansion. We prioritize expanding how our patients access care, ensuring their ability to access it in ways that fit their lives. It's important to us that the care they receive is high quality, designed to address individual needs, and is affirming. We actively work to collaborate with community partners, and individuals from historically excluded groups in these efforts. As we do this work, in the spirit of our principles of respecting and honoring all people, and constantly evolving to be a more representative and justice-centered organization, we will continue to solicit and accept honest feedback and continuously learn from our mistakes with grace and humility. We pledge to work every day until full health, dignity, belonging, and self-determination are a reality for everyone. Thank you.
I'm now very proud to welcome Alma Kuba-Tie, the National Organizing Director for the League of Women Voters, which is a nonpartisan grassroots organization working to protect and expand voting rights and ensure that everyone is represented in our democracy.
Buenas tardes. Good afternoon. My name is Alma Kuba-Tie. I'm the National Organizing Director for the League of Women Voters of the United States. And I have to say, I am so honored to be here today with so many powerful leaders, powerful women, standing strong against racism here at our nation's capital. And I would say that this is the perfect place to talk about why we can't wait, why we need equality and justice now. The people who call Washington, D.C. home deserve full representation and self-government simply to be equal to everyone else in the states. As a majority minority city, the 700,000 residents, which by the way, is more than the populations of Alaska, North Dakota, and South Dakota, pay more federal taxes than 22 states, pay more per capita than any other states, serve on juries, fight for the United States in the military, and raise American families, yet they don't have U.S. senators or representation in Congress in the most democratic country in the world. Does that make sense to you?
No.
The people of D.C. deserve the same rights as every other American. It is discriminatory to subject the people of D.C. to the whims of the United States Congress and the President. Statehood for D.C. is the only permanent solution to end this centuries-old injustice. And if I have not made myself absolutely clear by now, this fight for statehood is a fight for racial justice. Washington, D.C., a majority of color jurisdiction, is the only capital of a democratic nation that denies its residents a vote in the federal legislature. That is embarrassing. And even though the overwhelming majority of D.C. voters support this statehood, Congress has for decades made racist accusations that somehow the people of D.C. are incapable of governing themselves and refuse to vote on statehood. Well, let me tell you, I am Puerto Rican. I was born and raised in the colony of Puerto Rico. I know what it feels to be told that you are less than, not capable of, that there is something inherently wrong with you. To hell with that. We need to stand strong, united, like we're here together. And this is how we turn things around. This needs to change. Here in D.C., this discriminatory status hurts D.C. residents in a number of ways. So one thing is that we have Planned Parenthood here. Well, D.C. can't use local money to provide low-income women with abortion care through Medicaid, and can't regulate and tax the sale of marijuana. And D.C. gun laws are subject to congressional temper tantrums and political games. When it comes to state receiving emergency funds, like the CARE Act to fight COVID-19, then conveniently, D.C. is a territory. And it's denied the funds that it needs to keep the residents safe. Everything has to be a damn fight. DC can't prevent the federal government from using its military force on these streets against its residents, as the former president did against peaceful protesters on the streets in DC calling for racial justice for George Floyd.
That's right.
And because DC doesn't have influence in Congress, it is not really a desirable home for corporations, despite being in the middle of the East Coast and being home to the U.S. Capitol. Because of this, DC loses out on countless dollars in corporate tax revenue that flow to the nearby states, to Virginia and to Maryland. So our democracy is stronger when everybody is represented equally. And democracy is definitely worth fighting for. Systematic racism and voter suppression unjustly target communities of color and silence their voices from participating in our elections. We must come together to fight against racial injustice and ensure that everyone is represented in our government and that our election system is free, fair, and accessible to all. The League of Women Voters will continue to fight for DC statehood, and we will continue to power democracy until our democracy works for everybody in America, and I mean everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alma. We're going to close out today with the wonderful Melanie Campbell, who's the CEO of the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to increasing civic engagement and voter participation in Black and underserved communities. I welcome Melanie.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you to the YWCA National Capital Region. Thank you all for coming out here today on this beautiful, beautiful day. I am normally pretty fiery, but I have to fly on Tuesday, so I got my second booster shot. So if I don't fall asleep standing up here, that will be a victory. I know you heard a lot today, and I was sitting listening and understanding that we are the choir. So all of us are deputized to go back into our communities, whether we live in DC, Maryland, Virginia, whether we're traveling, to push for what this rally is all about. We know that there's structural things I'll talk about, but then when you talk about racism, the reality is it is also about what happens in our neighborhoods. It's also about the conversations or lack of conversations in our communities, with our families, with our friends. Because what's happening right now in this country, the continuation, what I call the backlash of forward progress for Black people in this country, which is where the root of racism really started in this nation. You heard my sister Nan talk about the realities when we talk about racism and how in the United States of America is rooted on that from the very beginning of the formation of this United States of America. I was watching last week, I'll age myself, and others you can nod or not nod if you want to age yourself. But there's a movie that was put out in 1993. I wasn't a kid, I was a grown woman, called Sankofa. Anybody saw that? Hey, and so Sankofa really was a reminder. It was very traumatic for the young people who were in the audience with me to watch Sankofa. People heard about Roots. It has its own level. But Sankofa gets to the root of racism, which really at that time was about the transatlantic slave trade, but it narrowed in on a sister who it was in Africa, it was in the West Indies, who was dealing with the slave trade, and she went back to Ghana and was there and went into the slave castle. And the idea of being pushed into this reality that she woke up as a slave woman during that time, and the level of brutality of dehumanizing a human being. That's the core of racism.
That's right.
And so when we say we want to eradicate racism, the simple solution would be human, treat each of us as one would want to be treated. To humanize each other and not make you or me an other. Because when you allow the idea of being other, then you can allow and you can watch George Floyd die for 9 minutes and say in a moment, well, you know, we can do something about that. But then you turn right back around 2 years later, we don't have the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Why is that? Because somehow we can just, well, that's the other. So if we're serious about it, then we'll have a George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. We won't have Reverend Sharpton continue to have to go and preach eulogies for black folks in this country. Black men, black women, young folk, even white folks. I remember he preached not too long ago. If we're serious about it, then we will be concerned that the homeless rate in this nation is rising once again. And most of the time when you look and you see that black and brown folks from all ages, quite frankly, in this capital and anywhere else in the country. I come from a small town. You can see it even in my hometown. So gentrification make cities look prettier and all of that. But those people are sleeping on the streets. So we dehumanize them because we can pass them each and every day in this nation. So if we're serious about eradicating racism, then we'll deal with affordable housing. And we can control that because we elect folks here and down the street and over there. If we're serious about eradicating racism, connect the dots. The attack on critical race theory is not about classroom books. It's not about what you heard Ted Cruz, if you watched our sister get through Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. You know, this booster shot, y'all are telling you, it's rough. Mine is a little fuzzy. But when you watch that attack on the school, what's the school name here in D.C.? Georgetown Day School. Don't sleep that. It was all connected. And you have the ability to make folks feel like, well, my child shouldn't have to worry about what black people went through. Because somehow that makes for them to be, how do you want to say, traumatized. Have them watch Sankofa if you want to understand the root of racism and trauma. And if you don't deal with the history of this country, I'm so sick and tired of talking about racism. I'm tired of talking about it. We got to do something about it. Or these generations that are coming up from Minnesota, where I'm from, to Washington, D.C., to all across this country, we're going to have another generation that will otherize their neighbor, that kid over there. So I got more I could say, because you heard it all. It doesn't matter what we're going to do when we leave this rally.
All right now.
I don't care if it's 5 or 50 or 5,000. We hear the same things.
Right.
So the question becomes, what are we going to do about it? So you ready to do something about it?
Yeah.
I'm ready to do something about it. I'm going to keep fighting till they put me under the ground. And make sure that I do what I can. So do what you can do in your dash. And let's fight racism. Let's find a way to move it down the street where it needs to go, so we can uplift each other and have a better nation. We're all in this together if we're serious. Thank you. God bless you. Peace and power.
Thank you so much, Melanie.
today to wrap this all up. I'd really love to welcome Akishua Elias. She's the president of the DC chapter of the NAACP, which is the nation's oldest and largest civil rights organization, whose vision is to ensure a society in which all individuals have equal rights and there's no racial hatred or racial discrimination.
Thank you. And good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I have the challenge this afternoon of firing you all up, but also getting ready to close us out. So as we journey around understanding the importance of standing against racism, I challenge us to look at all of our isms and how we can do better as a people and as a community. As she just mentioned, my name is Akishua Ali. I am the president of the NAACP Washington, D.C. branch. For over 112 years, the NAACP has championed the fight for racial justice as the nation's oldest and largest civil rights organization. Today, we stand against racism and demand justice for lives lost through racist acts and unconscious biases, because many of us have biases. Even if we're not aware of our isms, we have unconscious biases, and we can all challenge one another to do better. So today, when we stand and say, Black lives matter, my life matters, your life matters, all lives matter, we have a responsibility to hold ourselves accountable and our communities accountable, because everyone deserves